when that piece did sell, I was like, what the fuck? Like, I was filling potholes with tar in Alaska, surrounded by 50 mosquitoes, like 13 hours into the day. And then all of a sudden, boom, like this piece sells. And I, just made money that pays a month's rent when I had been struggling, before that, it was prints and sell those and like trying to get jobs working for corporate companies.
GM, welcome to the Boonafide Experience podcast. I'm your host, Kyle, but really most people, they just call me Boona. That was Connor Grasso talking about the life-changing moment where he realized he could be an artist full-time in the Web3 space. Connor Grasso is a multidisciplinary artist based out of Alaska who's been creating for the past 5 to 6 years. OG in the crypto space, or in the NFT space, which is to say, has been around here for the past 2 years. His first start was in 2020. Connor, we dive into a lot of his early childhood. In living in Alaska, he a lot of times lived off the land, lived off of whatever food they killed that day, and it's super interesting to really dive into how that's affected his appreciation for photography, his appreciation for nature. There's just a level of respect that comes with Connor in nature that you just can't get with anyone else. I think those past experiences are a really like telling tale of a lot of like why his work is so special. We dive into an important topic of pseudonymity and the importance that does play in the Web3 space. Talk about his growth as an artist, from the past like 2 years to now. And lastly, we discuss where my introduction to Connor was, which was his collection called Memory Palace, which was some of my favorite work of his to date, and really where we made our first connection, and really where this whole podcast originated from. Connor's he's been one of my favorite people to watch in the space. Has just an incredibly bright future, is on the top of his game right now, creating some of his best work. I cannot wait for you to hear his story. Let's go ahead and get started with the show. Cool. All right, we're both recording, man. GM Connor, how are you, man?
Sweet. GM, how are you? Doing great today.
Good, dude. Good. So, you are the first person I've interviewed in Alaska. And so I've interviewed people in the West Coast. I've interviewed people in the East Coast. I've interviewed people in Spain. I've interviewed people in Europe, and even recently Australia. But like Alaska, this is a first for me, man.
A lot. Being from Alaska, even just like meeting people. Normally they're like, I haven't met somebody from Alaska, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I'm like the only one over here.
It's like, I'm genuinely curious. Like, so is it like, how often does it stay light there? Like, are there just periods of darkness where like, like you just the sun just never comes up? And how does that like affect you?
Yeah. I mean, so I guess it sort of differs, depending on where you are in Alaska, because it is so big. But where I grew up in interior Alaska, we were pretty used to seeing, 24 hours of daylight for about 3 months in the summer. And then, in the winter time, you might be getting 4 hours max of light.
Wow.
And, extremely cold temperatures, of course. But in the summers, it gets pretty warm. But yeah, so I'm from the middle of Alaska. I'm living in southern Alaska now, but the more north you go, the harder it gets in terms of sunlight and how cold it gets. And it totally has an effect on people. We have really bad seasonal depression up here. Sure. Just because it's really hard to get outside when it's super cold. And you just don't get enough sunlight. And of course your body adjusts, but it definitely has an effect on people. That's for sure.
Yeah. I was always curious about that, man, because it's, as much as I complain about, weather here in Texas, like I feel like it's small potatoes compared to like, there's so many different there's so many more challenges that y'all have to face up there, because it's just like, I mean, so when it does get daylight, like when there are those 4 hours of daylight, when does that typically happen? Is that like in a time where people are awake, or is it like when people are typically asleep?
I mean, so as you get further into the winter, those hours sort of wane down for a while and they come back up. So usually, over the course of an entire winter, you'll see those daylight hours sort of be between like 10 and 2. And that's about it. So for a lot of people, you're at work or you could be in school. So, for most people daily, they're inside, not even getting any of that daylight.
Got it. See that, man, that's brutal. Like, so you go to school and it's dark, or you go to work when it's dark, and then you leave and it's dark.
Yeah. I remember,
Man,
being in school and getting up really early, and there's just a little bit of light coming up, and then you get to class, and then you're walking out to your car after school, and there's a little bit of light left, and by the time you get home, it's like dark. Yeah,
that's strange, man. Like, it's like you always want to live opposite of where you grew up, or like we always want to live somewhere else where it's just completely different than what home is. But I always like the dark, man. I always like dark way more than light. Because darkness for me is associated with stillness. That, because like when it's dark in Texas, people are like either getting ready for bed or they haven't woken up for work yet, and there's just a very calming, energy about the darkness. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I can resonate with that because when I first started getting into photography, which would have been 2015, 2016 now.
Yeah.
One of the first things that, and I was pretty young at that point, so I was still trying, sort of becoming aware and self-sufficient as a person, and trying to find myself in a way. And I spent most of my weekends going out to shoot aurora in the wintertime, and the absolute like complete stillness of the cold temperatures makes sound travel a lot less, and the darkness really like sets the stage for that. And I remember hiking through like waist deep snow up mountains in the wintertime to try to find a spot to photograph the aurora, and sitting there for hours sometimes, and just not even a single sound besides maybe the crunching of the snow under your feet. And so I've had so much time, and like what came from that a lot of the time was you're sitting there just like really thinking about life. And that's where I mean a lot of those instances where I found I felt like I started to get to know myself better was in settings like that where you are by yourself. And it's also there's so much going on today, especially with young people and just the overstimulation and social media, etc. And it seems like everybody's trying to find an answer or something like that to find some sort of peace. And it's interesting, how it's like, I think we forget, like you can just go outside into the natural environments that like we are a part of. Like we are like built from the same things that we can experience outside. And I think nowadays we forget that you can go outside into like where you're meant to be as a human being, and you can sit there and just shut up and like take a second to like reconnect with the earth. And I think oftentimes, for me at least, and maybe it's because I grew up in the middle of the woods in Alaska, and it's my answer, and there's a million answers for everybody's specific situation. But I always felt just like we obviously are getting further away from being connected with the earth, and that a lot of the answers for a lot of the things in life can be found just like outside.
Yeah.
And in a mental capacity,
And it goes, but it touches on the deeper topic of like the answers to the questions that we're seeking are never
Yeah.
external.
No, they're always within yourself, which is an interesting thing because the series of artworks that I've been working on is exactly that. And so I suppose that's just an interesting thing to come up, because I've sort of been exploring the fact that like everything that you do need is like right here. And your perception, you're absolutely in control of your perception of everything, and you're absolutely in control of how you react to different things.
I want to transition that to, since we're talking about art and we're talking about your journey here, like, you mentioned you've been doing this for like 5 or 6 years. When, like, what kind of led you to photography? Like, what kind of, like, was it always like a fascination, or like, how did you even stumble upon this?
Great question. And yeah, I guess, it wasn't something that, I was always interested in, actually. And it was more of sort of, I stumbled into it. But I mean, so starting with kind of where I grew up, I mean, I grew up in interior Alaska in a small town of like 1,000 people. And the closest next town was an hour in each direction. And then those places had even a smaller population. So I grew up in a very, like, to an extreme, in solitude, like most of the time. Like, of course, this is when I was younger and I was with my family, but, there wasn't much to do besides go outside. And I spent my entire childhood like fishing and running around on riverbeds and getting out of school at 8 years old and taking four-wheelers. But so essentially I was just exposed to nature all the time, and it was very important to people in that community, people who hunted and fished, and grew vegetables for subsistence, and it was important in a multitude of ways. And that's sort of the way that I grew up. And over time, I ended up moving to the second biggest city, which is still small compared to anything down south, called Fairbanks. And kind of by myself for a few months, and I ended up deciding to go to this thing called Walk Alaska. And it was something that, some friends that I have now had started up back in the day, where like on Sundays, everybody would get together and pick a place to go hike for the afternoon and bring cameras. And some people brought cameras, some people brought weed, you know what I mean? So that was kind of just, it was a really chill thing. A lot of the people that, would go to those things were people that were a bit more introspective and creative, and, more, people that were more connected with the earth, at some level. And it really reminded me of a lot of the people that I grew up with, where, it was like, let's get outside, or let's just go do something. And so there were some photographers there, photographers that are still my close friends today, that I got to know slowly over time. And then I continued to, sort of go on these every week. And, then my dad told me that I could borrow his camera one time. And that was the first time that I was like, all right, yeah, I'll take the camera. And, I went to that, and I sort of just like, boom, I fell in love with it because, I'm around these great people. I'm in a beautiful place. And it sort of started as me just like documenting like the people that I was with, and, the places that I were going. And that was kind of as simple as it was. I was just trying to, make things that looked cool or spoke about the experience. So, that's sort of how it all got started. And I mean, from that point on, like I never really put the camera down. I've been doing it since. So yeah.
That's incredible, dude. I mean, there's what I was thinking about when you were. There's a couple things I was thinking about, and they're two completely separate topics. So, this might go in an interesting direction. But like, I feel like, there's probably people that grew up in an environment like you, like where you're not like farming because it's like the thing to do, or like it's like a pastime. It's like you're literally farming to eat, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's like you're literally doing this to stay alive.
Yeah. I mean, it was, and somebody would go on a fishing trip and they would go get fish, and you'd be like, well, when you get back, like, we'll give you some moose meat or some bear meat or, some caribou in exchange for some fish. And, we were still sort of living in that subsistence lifestyle. And,
wow.
and as a side note, it really highlighted the importance of sort of that culture and community of sort of barter and trade and subsistence.
I feel like you probably learn a lot more, because we're so spoiled now. I mean, I was actually having a conversation with a friend on the phone just a couple hours ago, and it was like we've gotten so like I can literally order my groceries, online, and either have them delivered to me or I can go pick them up.
Right.
We've gotten so like, it's so easy to forget that like people used to have to hunt for their food, Yeah.
And I mean, those are the people that I grew up with. And I mean, like I was saying earlier, that we didn't even have a grocery store in the town that I lived with. There was only 1,000 people there. So when, for the first, 10 years of my life, the closest grocery store was 2 hours away. So at least, once a week, once every 2 weeks, we were driving 2 hours north to Fairbanks and 2 hours back just to get groceries. And, the only things you could really get in town were, simple things. And at that time it was like $6 for a gallon of milk. And so, I definitely, I think back and I'm like, yeah, I totally grew up in a childhood that differed so much, but I also learned a lot, and I wouldn't trade it for the world growing up like that. And, I remember as a young kid, like going hunting with, my friends and their family. Alaska Native really taught me a lot about respecting animals, and that was just like extremely eye-opening. And, and I felt like that was, so important to learn, because you can just go to the grocery store now and pick up like a fillet, but you miss the experience and respect of, like actually hunting that animal, and you're going on to their turf and watching them and, observing them and taking the time to learn about them and how, the animal works. And, I think we lose a lot of that respect now. And I mean, of course, like today, I go to the grocery store,
right?
100, you know what I mean? It's, right. But, when you do get the experience to do something like that, I think, it just takes you even closer to nature. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, I'm sure, if you had the choice to go to the grocery store or do that today, if you had the option, it's like, obviously you would go to the grocery store,
Yeah.
But and I've had moments like that in my life where it's like, I'm really glad that I did that, but I would never choose to do that again. If I have the choice, I'm not going to do that again.
Sure.
But it's one of those experiences where it's just like, you're super like, damn, like that shaped a lot of who I am, or that like taught me a really, like you were talking about, more of like a respect for the environment or respect for a certain element of life, that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise unless you're like forced into doing that. Like when you don't have a choice, like when you're trying to achieve something, you have to have a relationship with it and you have to work with it. And that ends up shaping you.
You can learn a lot from the land, for sure. You know what I mean? Just, it can be like as simple as the leaves falling in autumn, and you can sort of look at that and think about, life and death or
Yeah.
rebirth or growth and things like that. And that's happening, right outside of everybody's windows.
Yeah. Yeah. Even here in Texas, we got the rain and like our grass has been dying. Like our grass
Yeah.
has been dying. And just like after like 3 days of rain, there's already patches of grass that are starting to grow back. And it just happened like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And if you sit there and look at that and apply that to our lives now, like, you can apply that to a lot of different situations and instances.
It's fascinating, man. It's a fascinating thing. And so I have another tab up and I've observed some of your work and, a lot of it, there's a darker theme to it and there's a lot of introspection to it, but there's also this area where on your foundation page, where you have a little bit of mixed media, and so I wanted to like go like that. Cause that to me, when I saw that piece, after Fungi collected it and I was like, that looks a lot different from like some of the work that you usually
Right.
put
Yeah.
out.
Of
So
course.
like, what's the story? I'm just curious, man. Like, what's the story behind that?
So, I mean, somewhere along the lines of, growing up in Alaska and spending most of my time outside, I started to experiment with psychedelics at a relatively, heavy rate. And, I mean, for me, like, just a disclaimer, like always, like be at a point where you know yourself, do the research and, find out if that's something that you should be doing or not, because it is not for everybody. And,
thank you for saying that. And before you get into that, we had a conversation in Spaces about this. There was like a polarizing topic of like, everyone needs to do this. And I'm just like, no.
Yeah.
That's very wrong. Like I've been sober for 9 years, but like I did my heavy dose of psychedelics, back in my day. And there were always like, and I never had a bad time because there was an intent behind doing it. And I was with the right people at the right time. Right. So I want to double down on that disclaimer that
no, go for it. It's important.
I never had a bad experience because I never did it. There were times at random when I was like experimenting with it and doing with it, but I was always in a safe environment. I was always with people I trusted, even if there wasn't a true intent to do it. Most of the time there was, but there was times where like I'll be like I say all this, but it's like there were times where we just fucked around and did that, but it was, again, I like to like double down on that.
No, super, super important. So, I mean, I started to experiment with psychedelics. And for me, it was, like we said, like the people you're with, where you're at here and like where you're at, like in terms of like your environment. And I always made sure that, those things were positive. I felt comfortable, with the people that I was with. And, I started to go out to, these stunning and crazy locations and, take a tab or two of LSD or take some mushrooms or take them together. And, those, and like you said as well, like I always had intention when, it was never like, oh yeah, I'm just going to do this for fun. It was like, I want to think about maybe something that I had pre-composed in my mind, like something in myself that I wanted to address or something that I wanted to further my appreciation for, like as an artist. And that took my already pre-existing appreciation for nature and the outdoors, and it took it like to an atomic level. And having those experiences and like looking at the trees and leaves and looking at the ants and like just for 12 hours I'm outside, hundreds and hundreds of miles away from any person. I'm completely like, I might be by myself. I might be with a couple other of my close friends, but I put myself out in nature and, those experiences, also, in terms of getting the inspiration for, maybe some of the mixed media pieces that I work with, is psychedelics and music really hit like really powerfully for me. So I think, where, Anonymous, the piece that, I had created that Fungi had collected, was sort of addressing, the concept of anonymity today, and like anonymity in the NFT space. And the inspiration from it sort of came from a little bit of my, experience with psychedelic music, psychedelics, and, nature. And those were sort of the things that started to come in my head when I would listen to that music. Like, I would think about these, crazy, psychedelic, trippy, I would think about like what it would be like to shoot a music video for like a major hip hop artist, like in Alaska. And, my editing style for videos started to become very trippy. And yeah, so I mean, I think, I would attribute a lot of my inspiration for that mixed media to like psychedelics.
I like that. Yeah, I mean, there's always a lot of introspection that happens from doing that, whether you want it or not.
Yeah.
It's again, it's kind of what you sign up for. And I remember when I was doing it, to kind of like when you, something that stuck out in the story was like you're like watching the ants. Like that's not something I had ever done before. I was doing that, and you're just like, I was just like so laser focused, and you start to like really watch how they move and operate, and you're like,
Yeah.
man, this is kind of wild,
Ants
and
are crazy.
yeah, dude, ants are crazy. But the wild thing is that like, there's not just ants that are doing that. There's so many different species that are organizing in their own way to like achieve a common goal all around us. That like, that was kind of like when that hit me, I'm like, wow, world is really big, and kind of like, you learn so much by being in nature, and you learn so much by just being there. So one thing before I move on to some of the music video stuff, like you mentioned like this was like meant to tell the story of anonymity in the NFT space, and it's something that like of course, like I was already doxxed before I came into the space, so it wasn't really a factor for
Something
me.
that you thought about. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I thought about it, but it was like I kind of like had already like that ship had already sailed for me.
Sure. Yeah. No, same here. Totally.
Yeah. So I mean, one of the things though that like this was actually, wow, dude, this was a long time. Feels like a long time ago. It was one of my second or third podcast guests on Michael Tant. He's a crypto investor, and he was talking about the different benefits of like like pseudonymous cultures, and like crypto is like the start of something like that. And something I even had a conversation with where it's actually very interesting, and I'd like to like know your take on this or riff a little bit on this, because there's people that I've never seen their face before that I've trusted, that I trust more than people that I know who they actually are, or who know who their face is. And there's this like conversation of like, it's this weird human thing of like, if I don't know that person's face, then I can't trust them. And like, I feel like crypto is in this anonymity is like challenging that belief. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think, my take on it is pretty much like, it removes like, like you were saying, like we're so used to making a judgment on somebody, whether we realize it or not, on what somebody might look like or how they might speak or something like that. So I think it really makes you focus on like how that person moves. If we're talking specifically about anonymity and NFTs, and how that person like, treats people. And because, I'll definitely say, like, for me, like, I do tend to trust most people all the time. And I've never really like second guessed somebody because they are anonymous. So, I think it sort of just makes you, take people for like what they are here rather than,
Mm.
they're, our bodies are just they're just carrying who we really are. You know what I mean? So,
Yep.
on that topic, yeah, I think it's like extremely powerful.
Like, I want to talk about your music videos, or like the videos that you've done as well. Like, when did you start doing that?
The paintbrush isn't far from the camera and every other medium, it's, about the intention behind that.
Mm.
And I think, yeah, like photography is definitely still something that I feel like speaks for me the most. It's how I connect with other people, it's how I connect with other people the best. And it's how, I've come to like tell, stories about my life and, make comments about the world. So, yeah, I mean, that sort of those inspirations and things for me, like they did like leach out into mixed media, and they did push me into video. And how I got started with that was again like psychedelics, music, and nature. And some of my first videos were outside, shooting on a DSLR, out in the mountains with a tiny little speaker, and somebody's like, doing their thing for the camera. And, I was watching so many music videos. I was really inspired by Og, which is the team that does all of like ASAP Rocky's stuff and ASAP Mob stuff, and was extremely inspired by them. And watching a lot of the stuff that TDE was doing was extremely inspiring to me. And yeah, I just I was in Alaska. I wanted to do something that would sort of highlight music in Alaska as well. So that was some of my intention behind sort of getting it started, is like, I wanted to further my craft. I wanted to, be somebody who could also, like show off Alaskan musicians, because Alaska's small, man. And like, there is some really talented musicians up here. And, for me, being in Alaska for so long was also a challenge in my own creative career. Because there isn't a lot of community or people to grow and connect with. And, it's the same for musicians. So, I started reaching out to people, and I did a few small local things, and that's kind of how I got started with this, I suppose. And that was kind of my intent and inspiration behind getting into music videos a bit more.
And it's, it's interesting though, like one of the things I've been putting together as we've had our conversations is that like, it's like it's more of a perception, like our perceptions are reality, and it's an important thing on how we choose to look at the world. It's like, because one could look at how you've grown up and like where you live as like this like place of like, oh, there's nothing to do, and like there's all this like, there's not really a big community, and there's all this, but it's like when you flip it on its head and you look at it from another perspective, it's like, damn, if you understand that there's a lot of talent and that the environment doesn't necessarily correlate with like talent,
Yeah.
When we kind of like flip that on its head, and like, because for some reason for some reason people put that together, it's like, because you look at cities like New York or LA or like Austin or like, there's just a lot of talent that's attracted to that city, but that's not, it doesn't, the environment doesn't have really anything to do with like creative talent. Where I'm going with that is that, instead of choosing to say like, damn, like there's nothing to do here, or this and that, it's like, damn, like there's a lot of talent, and like you saw this as like it looks like an opportunity versus like a self-pity, like versus like a pity party.
Yeah,
like,
no, and I think, a big thing in retrospect, looking back, is that you had to, up here, like if you're into something creative, like you gotta go out and like do that shit.
Right.
Like you gotta like get up, and it's freezing fucking cold outside, or like whatever you got to drive 6 hours, or, there's an extra step for everything in Alaska if you're, a creative person. And, I think like finding that drive and that like, okay, I'm going to do this today, like really apply, like was, in retrospect, looking back, a good lesson to learn it. And just for things in your own life, like I'm going to go out and do this. And like, I'm not going to stop. And like, it might take years, or, you know what I mean? And you gotta just have I think it just really gave me a sense of like drive, I suppose. And I think like for a lot of people, knowing like this is your starting point up here, like, and you gotta make a name for yourself, and like you're gonna do whatever you need to do to, do that, and that builds, passion, and people identify with that,
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I think you are almost at an advantage if you can get over that hump, because it's like the opportunities in places where there's not as big of a population are probably way greater. It's probably a lot easier to find that. Of course, you don't know it until you do it. But, like trying to make it in, a big city, it's hard to do because there's a lot of talented people. And it's like if you can choose to see it from a different perspective of like, damn, there's a lot of talented people. And even though I have to take one extra step, I feel like, like we talked about this a little bit on Twitter, but it's like I just got finished reading The Alchemist, and it's like the universe kind of like conspiring to give you exactly what you want.
Fantastic book.
Dude, I'll tell you, I'm gonna put this live. That was the first book I've started and finished since elementary school, or junior high. I mean, maybe it was junior high. Yeah,
I don't read much either, so I'm like pretty much right there with you. That is a fantastic book to choose. Like it really is.
Yeah. I'm really glad I read that. And so, do you want to transition a little bit into like Web3 and NFTs, man? So it's like, how did you like find the space? Like what was your intro to this? Like what was like, because this is a hard industry to learn. This is a hard, like, even though there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah.
Like this is not easy, so what kind of inspired you to like go down the rabbit hole of this space?
So I think it was like mid 2020 and early 2020, I was living in Berlin, Germany. And that's when I suppose started sharing my work on Twitter more. So I had came to Twitter, like to actually share my work, early 2020. And, I started, I had years of archive. So I started sharing like a lot, and things started to catch on like relatively well. And I started to find, artists that I really enjoyed, artists that became friends. The community was growing. I kind of found a good mix of like, every single medium, from artist to 3D to, and really making connections and talking to people. And, this was before NFTs, like at this point, when I had gotten started on Twitter. And so it was just finding a community of really dope people, really dope artists, and, pushing each other and helping each other grow. And, mid 2020, I was back living in Alaska. And I had actually come up here because at that time, as soon as I got out of school, I joined a union hall, and I was working like building roads in Alaska, doing construction, working 70 hours. And I did that for 3 years. And I had come back which ended up being my last year because of NFTs and Web3. But going back again, like my first sort of introduction to NFTs was this little bit of chit chat in mid 2020 about like NFTs and, things. And I will say, like, mid 2020, it was easy to understand what was going on in NFTs. And, I tell that to a lot of people who would come to me now and ask, what's the best way to get into things. And of course, I give them some resources, but at the same time, I couldn't imagine like having to learn everything, like coming into it today. And there's a million things now.
I struggle with that too.
It hasn't even been that long.
Yeah.
but mid 2020, it was really simple. There was a couple platforms, there was a couple protocols and things going on. The community was small. It felt like you knew everybody.
Yeah.
And, you know, I guess, I had been following NFTs for a while. At that point I was taking everything with a grain of salt. I saw some friends start to get into it, like Etienne Cross from Brazil, and some of those artists, like Femzer, who was the first time that I ever sold an NFT, was a collaborative piece with Femzer, and that was on Super Rare, mid to late 2020. So that was the first time that I had ever actually minted a token, and what I was learning about, but at the same time, we were just, at that point, we were just having fun. This was all new. It was a lot simpler. We were all just trying things out. We didn't know exactly what was going on, and it was kind of still and it was still like an experiment. And, none of us ever thought we would be where we're at today. So yeah, I suppose, finding a community of artists, some people, it started to sort of leach out a bit, and people were talking about it. And, I decided to make a piece with Femzor, and that was my intro to NFTs, and basically dove headfirst into it from that point on, because when that piece did sell, I was like, what the fuck? I was literally working, I was filling potholes with tar in Alaska, surrounded by 50 mosquitoes, 13 hours into the day. And then all of a sudden, boom, this piece sells, and I, just made money that pays a month's rent, when I had been struggling, before that it was prints, and trying to sell those, and trying to get jobs working for corporate companies. And, that's soul sucking.
Yeah, it's a paradox doing that, because it's been, I think that's what has been exciting. One of the most exciting things for me to learn about, at least, is that, learning, talking to a bunch of photographers, it was the primary method was prints. The primary method was the primary distribution was Instagram. And one of the primary goals was getting a brand deal, or working with a company. But then the paradox of working with a company is you're seen for your talent, but then they put a bunch of rules around where you can't, you're still photographing for them. It's this weird paradox. And I think for me, one of the things I've learned after being here and talking to artists for a year is that it's not that I think one of the most it's not talked about enough, because it's kind of a heady topic to talk about, but it's humans are so wired to find this comfort zone, or this one size fits all kind of thing, and it's a this or that kind of mentality, where it's it's easy to get so passionate about Web3, where it's no, only Web3 tools, and only Web3 this, and this is the only way we need to do things now. But it's I don't believe that. I don't, there still needs to be that area of brand partnerships. Brands are going to come into the space whether people want them to or not. And it's up to us to enforce how we vote, on how we receive that community, or on how we receive that brand when they come in. But I like to amplify it, because I just like to highlight the fact that this is a very innovative technology that allows us to be self-sovereign. Like you said, you just made a month's worth of rent in one sale. That's life-changing. But it probably doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean that people need to go throw everything away that they've had and just go 100% into this. You know what I mean?
No. Yeah.
So it's just I like to mention that every time I can. It's no, man, this is just another path. And what I think is most exciting for me is that it changes the narrative of brand deals were the only thing, but now there's this other thing.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, early on being man, my peak goal is, working for somebody else. Like looking back at it now, it's like I don't
It's
knock
such a paradox, man.
and I don't knock a single person's hustle like at all, because I identify, people got to do what they got to do, and like everybody's got to do that shit at a certain level. It might not even be at a creative capacity. I think like if you are able to work for brands and like that, like hats off, like that's an amazing, thing to be able to do as a career. So, but at the same time, like, it's, you can't really like fully express yourself, and you're not necessarily being hired for, your creativity here, but your technical abilities. But, I guess, like, and that's when I realized, like I can, like, I was like, what? Like, I can actually just like do this, like, and at the end of that work season, like, I haven't gone back, and it has, and up till late 2021, like I slept on couches all 2021. I was in Los Angeles, like sleeping on couches, like at Zakari's house, or sleeping like at my friends. And, like I left the security of doing this construction job that made me really good money, and was like, I'm going to try to do this NFT thing. And, like I sacrificed comfortability and like for a period of time. And now I found myself like being like at a point where like things are, like I never thought that I would, be here. And Web3 kind of led me to this position.
Yeah. I mean, it's an eye opener for sure. And I especially because you mentioned a couple times like the curiosity, like, you mentioned a couple times the curiosity with protocols, and tokens and just some of the tech behind this, and I know you also work at Schiller. So it's like, what is it like when it comes to the future that, where we're headed, I guess is, I'm going to find a better way to put this, but it's like, where do you want to see this in like 5 to 10 years? Or like, what do you imagine like this place leads to? Oh, let's just keep it 3 to 5 years, because 10 years I think is too long of a time horizon. I don't think we can.
I mean, it feels like a year is too much, just because like coming in at the beginning and seeing where we are now, it's like I would have been like, what is happening? Like, you know what I mean? Like, things have moved so fast in just like 2 years, it feels like. But so it's hard to say, I mean, it would.
What is it that you like to see? What is it that you like to see? Let's put it like, make it a little easier.
For me, like art being like something that has become digitized, and I think, maybe for what that means in the future, maybe that is like 5 years from now, and just how we appreciate art. Like, I can sort of imagine like 50 years from now, looking back and seeing like the importance of what we did in, the 2020s, like looking back 50 years from now and seeing why this was so important. And looking back at it in retrospect and seeing like, maybe a lot of what we're doing right now, like, I think it's hard to see it as like, it is changing the world, but like at what capacity? And, 50 years from now, we could be like, this changed like everything. And I think like, that could be books like for us, and thinking back to, 70 years ago, and that being our main source of like how we're going to experience like the future now is being based on what I believe like is Web3 and the blockchain. Like that's going to deliver like human history, and that's going to deliver like art, and how we see a Picasso over the last, however many years it's gonna, now we're going to be experiencing it through tokens.
Yeah. That's a wild thought. I mean, it's kind of it's a wild thought. I mean, I I fuck with it, and I think that it's going to be a very interesting. It's really like the time. If there's one thing that I've struggled with being here is like number one, the acceleration of time here is something I've never experienced before, and it's so hard to keep up with, and especially when you work like a traditional job at the same time that's innovating in its own right. Like they're pushing the needle forward in the technology that they're creating, and I'm just like here, and it's just like it's like you hit the NOS button and it just like it's really hard though, because the one thing that I think it's important to highlight here is something you touched on the very beginning of that, is that human psychology hasn't changed, and this technology doesn't change human psychology. Humans have always been the same way, and I think that there's a delusion or an illusion or a mirage that all of a sudden this like WAGMI thing of Web3 is just like, damn, like I don't have to do anything to make it. I think that's like that's like where it gets lost, is that a lot of it's bull market mentality, where it's just like, where everything's up only, everyone's an expert, everyone.
Yeah, and it's just not the case when it comes down to
truth, but the reality is that like to get anything that like, regardless of like whether you build something for your own or you just want to build a good life for yourself, regardless like whether you work for someone else or you do more of your own or you do a mix of both or whatever the case may be, like what you mentioned before is that like hard work and like determination and like just a kind of a just relentless curiosity is like what's required to do that, regardless of the medium. And I think that to put it together of what I heard is that like this like opens, it's another door that makes it a little bit more, I guess, a little bit more motivating in a certain way. It's like there's like a light at the end of the tunnel. There's a new path to follow that wasn't there before, where it might be, it's more, instead of it being easier, because I don't want to, there's nothing about this space that's easy. Like there is nothing, as regardless of how many shit posts you see, regardless of the humor that like, I think that's a necessary part of this community, because like we're a lot of us who are trying to push the space forward are working really hard. And like the humor, you just have to have it.
I think it's a part of like morale.
Yeah.
When it comes down to it, it's a way to get people excited and involved,
Yeah, and like, dude, if there wasn't shit posters in the bear market, like, man, this would be very boring.
Yeah, and at least we can have a laugh about it.
Yeah. But just going back to that, I think I'm gonna trace it back to my story to help. Because sometimes I know what I'm trying to say, and sometimes I have a hard time saying it. So, like when I was like creating content just on Twitch in a very mature version of the internet, and it was just like, damn. I remember thinking to myself, I was like, is this really it? My dog has some words to say. But it's like, I was like, is this really it? And I remember struggling with that for a long time, for like a year and a half. And I remember coming here and it was almost like, oh no, this actually isn't really it. Like there is this whole nother opportunity where the internet is not as mature as I think it is. It's still very, very early. It's just this version of it. In order to like make it, or to like make a sustainable living off of just Twitch streaming, but the people that made it in that industry were early. You know what I mean? And they didn't come in 5 years later. And like the people that are coming in 5 years later have to work almost 5 times as hard to make it, because
that's absolutely true. Yeah. I mean, I feel like, even just the people that I do know, a lot of that attributes to the time that I came into the space, because like the people that I had the pleasure to like connect with now, there's no way that would have happened. Like if we hadn't been like early together or whatever, you know what I mean? And that's just one aspect of, the benefits of like it depending on the time that you came into it,
Yeah, I mean, and it goes back to your original part of the conversation of like giving people advice of like how to come into the space. It gets harder and harder every single, just call it month to.
Like I said, I couldn't imagine like coming in now. Like it used to be like, NFTs. It was one of like the one of one space in the art space was like the originator of where we're at now. And we'd gone through like the first like 5 or 6 months of the NFT space was like just one of one art pieces. And then we got into the generative thing, and then we got into like some of the like meme projects and collectibles, and we went through that super heavy, and now it seems like we're coming back into like, you know, one of one market, and you know, so that's really interesting to watch too, because like even when we were getting started in 2020, like the idea of like 10K PFP projects was like in nobody's mind. Like nobody even knew that was coming. So yeah, I mean, there's, you know, every month it's something like new, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean, I relate to that a lot, because when I came in, even though I think a lot of people got curious by the Beeple sale, you know, and that's like that was a big watershed moment in 2021. And I remember, you know, it wasn't, but I'll tell you this, it wasn't that by itself wasn't what like sparked that fire of like just curiosity. It was the Clubhouse chat where they were interviewing the two buyers of the piece like a day or two after, you know, and I remember attending that space, and I remember thinking like, there's no way this is actually possible. Like I remember having so many questions, like, how do you buy a picture on the internet? What does that mean? Like, you know, why do they pay that much for it? Like all these questions started coming to mind, but it wasn't until I experienced that Clubhouse chat where they were talking about a lot of the things that we're talking about today, where it's like self-sovereignty, you know, like proof of ownership, you know, not being able to tamper with things, you know, like royalties, you know, smart contracts, digital, and even beyond some of the nerdy shit like that I really enjoyed. It was like the importance. I learned the true importance of digital identity during that Clubhouse chat. Because there was this dude also in the mix of all this. I had no idea who any of these people were. Like now I look back, it was like Blau was there, you know, Hoff was there. It was also the same time of the historic like Fedora pipe alien punk sale. So that was all at the same time. And you know, me, literally no clue, right? Like this is my first introduction to like the space. And I remember this dude went on like a 10-minute monologue of like what this punk meant to him, and the genuineness and the thoughtfulness and like the emotional attachment to like letting it go. Like I was like, holy shit, man. Like this is like this. I had no words to describe it. All I could do was feel it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally. I mean, even like, you know, sometimes I'll be like, damn, like, you know, I'm like so connected to this. And it's like, you're sort of learning to appreciate in a different way, you know, than what we're used to, you know. Like I'll have a conversation with, you know, my parents, and, you know, they know what, you know, what I do, obviously. And it's like, it's so abstract to them to think like, oh, but you're not buying it to put it on your wall, and you know what I mean? And things like that. And it's like, you know, that's what's going to be important in 50 years, is that we've learned to appreciate digital things at an equal level. And, you know, those are the things that are going to be important, is that the way that we've like changed how we think and how things operate. And I feel like the core things are what's going to be like important.
Do you value a digital item? Do you value digital objects? You know, and that's, or do you value digital identity? And the funny part is that you could probably you and me or someone could probably run a social experiment, and you start talking, you could formulate a series of questions about, you know, about like people's digital identity with the, you know, even if you look at it like with Instagram or Twitter with the check mark, people will literally sell their soul for a digital check, for a digital blue check, but then they'll say NFTs are a joke. And this is a way, like, we, up to this point, we've been renting this identity from another company, but we value this so much over our physical just experiences and with people. You know what I mean? Like, it's so powerful, man. It really is, dude. And so I think when people remove, again, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with people and humans having bias around things, around, you know, around like, because if you take away the bias, like most people probably wouldn't disagree with anything that we're saying, or like they may, I mean, they have questions, but like it would probably make a lot more sense. You know what I mean? So
Yeah. I think, you know, I think like undeniably in the future, like this is, it's, you know, like everybody knows this is like a renaissance happening. Like whether you like it or not, a renaissance isn't like, you know, it doesn't, a renaissance isn't just about like the art. It's about like a disruptive moment in which like a, you know, a culture is changing. So, you know, that's what's happening here. And I think undeniably, like this is, you know, all this is going to change like how you like, you know, society moves forward and like experiences and feels things, and like how humans, you know, yeah, and it's like in terms of like sustainability, like within 500 or 600 years, like books aren't going to be the answer to how we pass down tradition and pass down information. You know, it's going to be through the blockchain, and like that's where it becomes like it's most powerful. Like like we need this in 500 years, or like where, you know, how are we going to know what's happened? How are we going to know what's happening today, like 500 years from now? It's, you know, it's got to be through the blockchain.
Right. I mean,
and like, what if we don't have that? Like, what happens? Like, you know what I mean? Like, do we lose like what humanity is today? You know, I don't know. So I think that's, you know, the most important thing about what's going on.
And I'm glad that we finally like unpacked some like what makes you tick about this, because I think everyone's got their own version of like what makes them the most excited about this. And like, I think that I think for me, that's a big part of it, is that like, you know, especially if we like humans are just obsessed with like, because history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, you know, and so everyone, you know, people are obsessed with history and how to consume that. And you look at all of the chaos and the disorganization and the distrust of like everything that's going on right now. You know, and you kind of look at like, I kind of look at this and I'm like, this is the one thing that I think the world absolutely agrees on. Like there's this like common mission of like, okay, if we are understanding that society is growing more and more digital, regardless of what people's opinions are saying about that, regardless of like, you know, Sharon, who's on Facebook and arguing about whatever political issue of the day, and but then shits on NFTs, but they spend 4 to 5 hours a day on the internet caring about their social identity that they're renting, that they don't know that they're renting. You know, if you look at that, like, and just the fact that like 50+ year olds are on Facebook, that's a wild thought. Like it's a wild thought for people who grew up without that and lived through technology changing versus having technology being a part of just the normal thing, right? You know, so it's interesting, and it's also like, and then you shift the conversation to the value of digital objects. Do you believe digital objects have value or hold value? And I think when you combine that together, it's almost this is the best solution that we have. And it's like, who knows? There could be a better solution out there, but so far there isn't. You know, so far this is kind of what we got, and it's pretty like revolutionary in its own way. And I think that the thing that I'm most, I guess, excited about is just like the fact that there's a lot of things that excite me, but the one thing I think, even from a lack of like just innovation, you know, like not even talking about like the technology or the stack or it's the fact that this industry is shifting people to actually start to think for themselves versus just get spoon-fed every bit of information.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, people are, you know, everybody's guilty of just going with it. You know what I mean? Like, oh yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, now, you know, we're seeing a bit of a change there, which is, you know, important to the evolution of everything we're doing. Yeah,
humans. Yeah. Dude, like, because there's we go through these like these cycles of life where it's like there's easy parts in life and there's tough parts as a society, and it's like this is that one area where it's like, damn, shit just isn't working anymore. And it's like there's a boiling point of like how much information I was willing to take at face value. because we're all naturally lazy and we're all naturally going to take the
Yeah.
path of least resistance, right?
Yeah.
And if an article is a buzzword and it sounds good, it's like, oh well, I guess that might be true.
Yeah.
I guess I'll roll with it. But there comes a point I think with me where I kind of just snapped out of it. And I'm like, damn, like I don't know if I believe that anymore. I don't know. Like I started to like question everything. And so
Which is an important thing
it is.
to be able to do, to just take everything with a grain of salt. And like, for me, like, I'm happy that, that's something that my parents always just pushed me to think the extra step about everything, and never told me, this is right, or, this is the right way to think about this, or the wrong way to think about this, which, I think, most people carry with them. And, this is just one of those things that, you grow up with, that can be sort of like, embedded within you. And definitely lucky to have had, grown up in a way where, it was like, we're not going to tell you what we think. Like, you figure that out on, like, you figure out how you want to think about that, but think about it deeply, so.
Yeah. Interesting times, my friend.
Yeah.
I want to talk about two pieces specifically, just to kind of like end this on a strong, end this on a strong note, man. Like, cause I think I had been following, like I had been seeing your work for a while, but I think where we really made a connection was on your Nifty Gateway drop, the Memory Palace. And, I remember after I collected that, it was the piece I collected was Expectations of the Worst. And that, I mean, for a lot of reasons, really, resonated. And it was a really important piece to collect, like, especially at the time that I collected it. And I wanted to just like, I noticed, and especially, like, because when I came into the space, I didn't know how to build my own conviction around. I guess I just didn't trust my own conviction enough, or trust that like I had good taste, or that I knew what to look for in people, or that I knew people that well. So in the beginning, when I came into the Web3 space, like I started looking at people, and I promise this will make sense in a minute, but I started looking at people who built the internet, or who participated in the birth of the internet, and I'm like, okay, what are they saying about this technology? What are they saying about Web3? What are they, so those were the people that I followed in the beginning. And so, especially with this recent piece that you dropped, and obviously now that I've been here for now a little over a year, but at the time, kind of like right at a year, I started looking at a lot of the artists. Like I saw the work and I'm like, damn, that's wild. And, like observing art and understanding what to look for in art has, again, I'm only a year into it. And so sometimes I don't know why I connect with a piece, but I know I connect with it. And I probably look way too far into it to like, like look past the unintuitive thought. But I started looking at a bunch of artists that I already follow, and like what they were saying about your journey as an artist, and how this was like a major like step up from people that have been following your work for a long time. And that was something that like was really, I don't know, that was really like impactful to me. And I'm like, damn, like this person's like clearly stepping it up, clearly leveling up their game, and I could tell just by the wording here that there was a really big story that you were wanting to tell here. So I just wanted to like, I guess for my own selfish reasons, like, I want to hear a little bit more about like this whole collection, because it's something I really resonated with.
Yeah. So, I mean, as I've been growing as an artist, I've, and I think I've always been a deep thinker, but I think, the process for me and which, I would share that was a long journey. And, and, Memory Palace for me was a lot about, what, like I was saying, earlier, is stepping into something extremely foreign and leaving like what behind you, and taking like that risk, and then falling into something that you love so much, and the mental battle. And for me, a lot of Memory Palace, in my own experience, and was a lot about learning about masculinity, and the absence of, a father figure as a young person. And, the project and the location is important to me, because it sets the setting for where I think people look at the work and kind of feel like that bit of bliss. But it's also specifically the place that I spent the most time thinking about who I am as a person, and like who I want to be, and thinking about some of the things that I was struggling with, or felt like I didn't have, or felt that I needed, and just a place to think when it comes down to it, whether it's positive or negative. And that's, what I was trying to reflect in Memory Palace, was the positive, was the negative, how important they are to each other. One cannot survive without the other, and you experience the worst and you gain so much pleasure and happiness on the other side, and they're really married to each other. And I spent a lot of time on that project, and it was very impactful for me, but I wanted to connect with the people. Like, I think everybody feels like that. And this was sort of my, attempt at, hoping that people can connect with that work, and know that there is other, in those times where you feel like nobody else is feeling how you're feeling. And just a reminder, like, whether, you're happy or you're sad, or you're going through some shit, or you've been doing great, like, there is people, that go through all that stuff every single moment all around the world. And yeah, so I suppose, that's what Memory Palace means to me. And, that's how I receive it, and how, but also at the same time, like I try to leave all of my work open to
interpretation.
Interpretation, and how people would like to view it. So, I hope, that, even though I'm speaking about what it means to me, I want it to mean whatever somebody feels like it means to them.
It's okay to like have the artist's interpretation, but completely have your own interpretation as well. Like that's essentially what it means to you and for you, but it can be interpreted a lot of different ways. And so I think for me is that, like, ever since I've started the creative journey about 4 years ago, like, and everyone deals with it to a certain extent, but like, man, specifically when I saw that piece, and like I saw what it was titled, and how it was laid out, I'm just like, damn, like I started like analyzing my own thoughts, and started analyzing my own, dialogue each day. And I'm like, yo, there is nothing positive that's happening here. Like, the only thing keeping me going is because like my spirit's found something that I've connected with. But like every expectation of what was going to happen based on a new opportunity was like the worst fucking thing that you could ever imagine. Like, like, bro, it was so bad. And I just remember thinking like, wow, especially around like personal relationships. And it was just like, holy shit, dude. Like, that was an area where it was the most prevalent. And I'm like, damn, no wonder like I miss a lot of things. Cause like every time I go into something, like my expectations of what the end result are going to be are so terrible. And I think, at least for me, it's natural. I guess it's an observation. It's natural when like we're trying something new, or we're taking a risk, or we're putting ourselves out there, or we're being vulnerable, like that there is a possibility of rejection. There is a possibility of a bad outcome coming out. But most of the time, in my experience, it has been the exact opposite, but yet we go through this battle, at least I go through this battle of like, damn, every time I've had these bad expectations, nothing even close to that has come about, Yeah,
but it's and that's why, first of all, it's really amazing to hear your experience in viewing Memory Palace. And and that's why, like I was saying earlier, like the elements of positive and negative, and expectations of the worst, and then it's, sister piece joviality are so important, because like, just like, what you said is, you get in those places where, you know, you're expecting the worst case scenario. And like, even for me, like a lot of that applies to like relationships and things like that. And then almost every time it's never as bad as you ever think it is. And that's why it's like, you know, in Memory Palace, you know, so important to include joviality, and the opposite of the expectation is like that happiness and being like, man, what was I so worried about this for? You know? So I think, you know, it was hard to deliver that. And, you know, that's why I spent so long thinking about this project and conceptualizing it, is because I did want people to, you know, take it for, you know, what they feel, but be able to put that into a way that somebody could visually like look at that and see, you know, maybe it represents something completely different. And I think like that's even more beautiful. Like the further away, you know, the someone's perception of it is from my own, the more beautiful I think that is, you know.
That has to be. That's cool. Yeah, and it's got to be rewarding to hear that. And I think, you know, even on a different scale, like when people hear with some of the people that give me feedback on some of the podcasts that I've done, it's just like, I would have never thought about that. Or I would have never thought that this conversation was the start of X, Y, and Z, or that this is the episode they listen to get motivation to even learn about the space, or to even connect with another artist, or to, you know. And so because I think I don't really understand the full power of like, you know, like I was just looking, I saw this as like, damn, I've been podcasting, you know, this is the industry I want to talk about, but I had no like, it's just like, this is just what I do, you know. And then like uncovering all of the ripple effects that these things happen, and that happens by doing this over time, it's really something special to like witness and to take in, you know. Because all these good things were not like a conscious intent, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just like I'm sitting here bullshitting with people and like talking with people and getting to know people without realizing the actual real effect of like what that has on others, you know. But I'm sitting here looking at metrics and downloads and like this and that, you know.
Like, you know, I think, you know, and I think that's natural. Like, you know, I think we all still do that today. And you know, it's a note to like do, you know, what you love to do and what you want to do to your full, like to your absolute capacity, and just focus on like creating. And if you do that enough, like, you know, and it takes some heart and some passion and drive and consistency, like things start to develop like for you. And not even for you, but, you know, you never know how you can affect somebody else. And, you know, maybe you said one thing that changed somebody else's life, and like maybe somebody looked at your artwork and like that changed their perception of something in their own life, or maybe it made them feel comforted. And like that's what this is all about. You know what I mean?
It's all about, man. Yeah, I like that, man. I think this is a, you know, I want to wrap it up though on a, probably one of the most recent highlights of your journey here, man, is the, like being accepted on the Super Rare, like, and not only that, but like having your first piece sell out pretty fast. And I remember when you were posting about this, you know, and I kind of, I'll be really transparent here. I did not notice the person behind the barn for the longest time until you showed that details post. And I'm like, how the fuck did I miss that? You know, like, is that,
I think, you know, that was my intent though. You know, I wanted, you know, and that was a response that I got a lot. But I wanted people to sort of like explore the environment of that photo. I feel like, you know, was like how it felt. And I feel like it felt like, you know, a specific way. And then to sort of find, you know, the subject and see where that takes somebody in a secondary capacity, you know?
Well, I think I was drawn to the contrast of the light compared to the sky. that was like the focal point and like where my mind went to. And
Yeah.
after looking at this right now, and I think it's easier to see where I was confused because the way the hand is angled, it almost angles the same. It lines up parallel with the post in that picture. You know,
Yeah.
so it's like it makes sense why like I didn't see that. Whether that was intentional or not, you don't have to answer that. But I just an observation on my part. It's like, oh, I'm looking at the support structure, you know, and so naturally when I see something that looks the exact same, I'm not going to recognize that as different. You know,
Right.
I'm going to
Yeah.
recognize it as a.
No, I think that's great. You know, I wanted that piece to, you know, be something that people had to really take a second to, or
Yeah.
had to, or can even come back to it and be like, notice something new about the image, or, you know, and yeah, I'm like, thank you again. It's been a long couple of years in my journey, and getting on Super Rare has definitely been a major highlight to that. And, yeah, I'm really excited, and I've got something coming on the 5th of the 6th too. So yeah.
Gotcha. I was just going to ask, like, you know, let's a little bit of what's next.
Yeah, 2-3 days. I have another piece coming out, hopefully. I'm super excited for that. And yeah, you know, in my own personal creative journey, that's what I've got coming up next. We're working on amazing things at Schiller. There's not too much I can say at the moment, but we got our heads down, and we're working on some amazing things I'm super stoked for. And yeah, I'm just kind of taking everything day by day, slowing my pace down a little bit, and trying to just, you know, I'm still, you know, every day just feeling like, you know, more appreciation for everything that's going on around me. So yeah.
Love to see it, man. Well, Connor, this has been fun. This has been a treat. Thanks for
This has been fantastic. This has been a great interview, and I just have to say that you're very talented interviewer. Absolutely.
Thank you, man. Thank you. It took a long time for me to figure that out. Not only did it take a long time for me to figure that out, but it took an even longer time for me to actually believe it. You know what I mean?
That's the hardest part. Yeah, you know, I mean,
yeah.
I feel the same way as an artist.
Yeah, dude. It's like you kind of feel it, and then but then there's this period of time where you kind of like intuitively know, but you don't really feel
imposter syndrome, man. Dude. Imposter syndrome.
To the max, man. To the max. One more thing before we sign off. Where can people find you? Where do you want people to like look at your work, or like, you know, to find you first?
Yeah, sure. I got my website. It's cnnr.io, and I'm on Twitter, cnnr. I even get confused on that's 3 N's, everybody.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's where I'll be most of the time, and that's where you can find some of my work. Yeah.
Cool, man. All right, Connor.
Sweet.
Peace out, brother.
Peace.